everyone hear me? Because I can't speak up a lot at this point in time. Before I start, I would like to say that it's becoming a tradition where I submit a talk and Steve does not accept the talk. And then somehow there's an empty slot and then I have to give the talk, but I haven't written the talk. And then I write the talk and everyone's like, hey Aneel, what are you doing? I'm writing my talk. Oh, when you're speaking, I'm not entirely sure. So, welcome to how I do Monktoberfest. So how many people have been to more Monktoberfest than just this one right here? That's most people, okay. How many people also attend Velocity ever? That's the smaller people. All right, how many people have seen me speak before? Oh dear God. Okay, that's a little frightening. So for some of you, some of this will not be new. But I gave a talk here 3 years ago, 2014, and it was called The Psychology of Change, and it was about the kind of churn we drive, especially in tech, as we continuously come out with new ways of doing things and then shove them down people's throats and try to get them to either do them or buy them or whatever. And involved me doing some reading and some research and some things about how change associated with your personal identity and how we get to a point of self-esteem through building efficacy through some actions, and that confidence eventually results in how we view ourselves in the world, and how when you force people to change all the time, that's painful. So I had a particular view of how change works at that point in time. That view has changed, so I'm going to talk about how I got from there to now and what I think is different now. Let's see. I don't think I wanted to say anything else here. Great. All right. So this all started in 2014 when I gave a talk at Velocity in New York. I think it was an Ignite talk, and it was called Unicorns and Language of Otherness. The thing that was interesting about it, to me anyway, was that I talked about how we distance ourselves from other people, and through labels and the way we talk about them, and it gives us a means of dismissing. Right? It gives us, you're not like me, thus your lessons don't apply to me, whatever knowledge you have is outside of my universal discourse, and I can ignore you or dismiss you out of hand. Interesting, if you've been paying attention to the news lately, you'll notice that when we cannot distance ourselves from people who do things that are genuinely reprehensible, we take what they've done and change how we talk about it, so that it doesn't impugn ourselves. So like a middle-aged white dude shoots up a concert in public, he's disturbed. It's outside of his control, it's outside of our control. We couldn't have done anything to help it. That's not what is said when it's someone who looks like me. So through its action of in-group and out-group behavior and labeling and differentiating ourselves from our fellow human beings, we end up with this sort of structure of biases that builds up over time, and it manifests in all kinds of ways. But one of the things it does that is interesting to me is that it prevents us from learning from other people. It frequently prevents us from knowing that there is a thing to be learned, right? Because if you can take a whole class of people and dismiss them out of hand, then their experiences are irrelevant and there's nothing for you to gain or to learn. And it's true of us as individuals, but it's also true of us as groups, and it's something you see in team behavior, especially when you get tight-knit groups of programmers who work on a particular project who will do things their way, and there are no lessons outside of their project worth learning from anybody else ever in the history of time, which is a common pattern, especially where I currently live and work in San Francisco. So the conclusion I come to at that time was that in order to move past this kind of psychological debt and this kind of team debt that you build up, and what you have to do is separate your identity from your decisions, and you have to sort of think of these things as separate, who we are from what we are past set of decisions in order to change. So later that fall, I gave the talk here. Called The Psychology of Change. And in that one, I was focused on primarily the hit that you take to your self-esteem when you try to change something you've done. right? So you've done something for a long time, you're good at it, or it's your pattern of behavior, you have confidence in doing that thing works for you. If I come to you and say, hey, that is dumb, or that does not work and you need to change, even if you accept these facts, to process that and to take something you've done and that's your way of doing things that you're good at and to stop doing it, you're basically introducing a hole in your person. And that hole has to be filled. And that hole cannot be filled by adopting the new thing until that new thing becomes part of your habit and you're confident at it and you're good at it. And you need to do something to fill that hole. And so what I said was, especially in the world of technology where we're subjecting people to constant change, not necessarily greater reward for that change, but just constant change, we need to provide ways for them to fill that hole that we create, right? This is why things like community support work and evangelism work and peer help work and pairing works, and this is why sales engineers exist to some extent, or onboarding happens. It's to help people go through the process of change and remove that feeling of lack of efficacy and remove that feeling of lack of competence in doing a thing. And one of the psychological conclusions I came to was that changing behavior actually hurts. It's like psychosomatically painful. Right, so the following year, at Velocity, I did another Ignite about who we think we are and who we are not. How we view ourselves as whole beings, right? Like I have a personal view of I am something, I'm a set of things, whatever those set of things are. We present frequently as if we have seamless identities that are whole and complete, but they're not. That's complete and utter bullshit. It's a myth. It's a comforting story that we tell ourselves about who we are. And if you keep up on neurocog research at all, one of the current trends, and it's not a new idea, but one of the current trends in understanding how human behavior works is that our minds don't act as a whole. Instead, it's more like mini camps of competing interests and personae and patterns that are shouting for dominance in any given situation. And at any given moment, one of them wins in some kind of like multivariate psychochemical Bayesian algorithmic thing that happens in our brain. And it's not entirely clear which camp is going to win at any given point in time because there are many variables, and the variables are different for every person, depending on their personal situation, setup, environment. So there are things below the surface of myself, of yourself, of every individual that we don't necessarily even know about ourselves, right? They come out in our assumptions and our biases, in some of our automated behaviors and how we react under stress and under pressure and how we react in different situations. So I posit that just like you have a presentation to the external world of who you are, you have a presentation to yourself of who you are. You can't really see yourself. You only see what you present to yourself, right? The self-identity that you are like, I am this, and turns out you're only that under certain conditions, because under other conditions you're a complete asshole or something else entirely. And people will go to extreme lengths to preserve their external identities that they present to the world. And I think we will go to similarly extreme lengths to preserve our internal identities that we present to ourselves. Our deep need to rationalize who we believe ourselves to be with what we actually end up doing leads us to cover up a lot of our personal realities or ignore them. But I ended up kind of at the same place that I had in the previous couple of talks, which was that we need to figure out what that reality is. You need to accept it, and then do like some kind of change. You need to acknowledge how you need to be different, and kind of divorce yourself from your past behaviors, and then change your behaviors. And I kind of sounded like an AA ad. But the thing is, I did not understand things like AA, and I came to understand like things in AA and why they work, and they're beautiful and magnificent, and I'm thankful to all the people who run such things and support groups. And so part of my understanding was that just like we kind of hold we say we should hold strong opinions weekly, we also need to hold strong identities, but weekly, because we need to be willing to have them change when they're problematic. But then at the end of that talk in 2014, I said something, no, this was the one in 2015? I said something which kind of foreshadowed the view I have right now, but I didn't know it. And I said that we should value what we do more than who we are, or who we think we are. So it's a year later since that last talk, and it's been an interesting year for the world in general, for our world in the States in particular, for my personal world in very high degree of specificity. Turns out the old curse about living in interesting times is, in fact, come to pass. We live in very interesting times. So I've been doing or running go-to-market for startups and large tech companies with a slight hiatus for about a decade now. Does everybody know what going to market means? Does that make sense to people? That makes sense to very few people. Okay, we're going to have a little digression, all right? So the reason I say going to market is a sensing mechanism of your business, because you can build a thing. It's, I would argue that building useful software that actually solves a problem for someone at sufficient margin to sustain a business and pay people and give them insurance and whatnot is surprisingly trivial. But that's a product end of product market fit. That's not the going to market, that's the building the product. The going to market part, where you get people to get a sufficient number of people to want to use your product and give you that money to grow the business and have investors and do all the things that we do where I currently live in the Valley and what people do in startups. Frequently involves getting those people to change their behavior, right? So to use your thing to stop using someone else's thing, or to use your thing in addition to the other things they're using, they have to do new things. Because that's the whole thing, right? In order to use your product, they have to do something they weren't doing before. Okay, that's not easy. That is extremely non-trivial. And I have no mouse. My mouse is no longer. There we go. Okay. Because someone is always going to feel threatened, especially when doing things the way they're doing them currently is part of who they are and how they build their reputation and their position in their company or amongst their peers or whatever. Motivating people by giving them something cheaper is, in the general case, a non-starter with some small caveats. It's certainly not fun. Guides, docs, videos, demonstrations, all the words in the world, in whatever form you deliver them, are just insufficient. Championing the glorious future, what we have come to call evangelism, what we used to just call sales, is a thing that actually works. But it brings people to the lake, but it doesn't usually get them to do the drinking, and also does not scale. Doing the work with people, right? Going and sitting with them, pairing, doing active onboarding, or what some people call, unfortunately, forward deployed engineering, works while you're doing it, while you're there doing it with them, but it also does not scale. All right, so that was a little digression. I'm glad everybody now knows what going to market is. So I've been doing that for a long time, and also at the same time I've suffered some personal traumas, and I've been faced with my own limitations on how much and under what conditions I'm willing, maybe able, to change. And I've also run headlong into the ways in which other people and under what conditions are willing or able to change. And that you can generally do nothing about that. So I read and heard some things too over the last year. This is from the British Psychological Society's Research Digest, which if you don't read and you're even a little bit interested in behavioral psych, it is worth reading. And it's just a blog, it's free. It's awesome. So it says, we know which kind of activities will bring us lasting happiness. But because we see them as daunting, and less enjoyable in the moment, we choose to spend much more of our time doing passive, more immediately pleasant things with our free time, right? Like, it's actually not that hard to figure out what's better for you or anybody around you. It is much harder to do it. This year at SRECon in Americas, Site Reliability Engineering Conference, for those that don't know, it's one of my favorites, but it's also like my area of knowledge and expertise, so no one else might care. Pooja from LinkedIn made this statement. This isn't what her talk was about. Her talk was about something else entirely, but she made this statement because it was kind of relevant. She basically told everybody in the audience that they were liars. That no one actually likes cleaning up technical debt. So I know one or two people who do, but they are outliers in the extreme, actually. And no one likes cleaning up technical debt because, it's not immediately pleasant or rewarding, and don't get that dopamine feedback of shipping a feature or doing something new. And then my now friend, or now who I consider a friend, Jinsu, who is one of my colleagues at the startup I'm at, Honeycomb, he's the other graybeard there, although he doesn't have a beard, but he might as well be a graybeard. He said something interesting to me because now that I've been in the industry for some time now, for me it's more than 20 years, and now that I've been doing startups for some time now, there is a significant difference in the experience that I have than on the average person on most startup teams for new companies. And Gene said something to me really interesting, which was that you can't expect someone to be who they're not. They are who they are right now, given their context and their experience set, and you can't make them 10 years from now. You can't make them 2 orders of magnitude more mature than they are. You cannot grant them your experience, because they don't have that experience yet. And it is unfair to expect that and to judge them on that and to try to structure a universe as if that's true, because it is not true and you cannot make it true. And then I read this post by Seth Godin. If for anyone who doesn't know what he is, he's basically a marketing talking head, but he's quite good, and I agree with him probably 95% of the time, because I find his advice to be accurate in the real world if you use it. Well, assuming you want to build the kind of business that I want to build. If you don't, it might be not that useful to you. All right. So Seth said, it's impossible to persuade someone that he's wrong, or she's wrong. Almost impossible to make your argument louder and sharper and have the other person say, I was wrong and I will change my mind. Far more effective. Help someone make a new decision based on new alternatives and a new story. Which kind of brings me to where I am in, at least in business right now. So I work at this startup called Honeycomb. In real life, this is my crucible for a lot of ideas, and I get to test them out on real human beings, which is great for me. I'm not entirely clear on how good it is for them. But I have been taking a new tack, all right? So for just a little background, I started my career as in support and technical operations. I was a software engineer for a while, and the large-scale systems development, what would now maybe be called a systems engineer. And then I moved into business roles, product marketing, mostly product marketing stuff since then. So I've kind of experienced the sales cycle at the large enterprise steak dinners end of it, and also at the small peer-to-peer online business-to-business SaaS startup end of it. But today, instead of trying to get anyone to change anything, we're trying to stake out ground by helping people solve very specific problems that they cannot solve, and in many cases gave up trying to solve. Right? So I'm not saying they have to change anything they're doing currently, right? I'm just adding new things. And generally this is a no-no in the business world. Like, you can't just tell people to, especially in technology, buy something completely new for a new problem and not replace anything, not change anything, not do anything that's painful. But what we're saying is, don't do something that's painful. That you have some set of problems that are unsolved. You know they're unsolved. You would like to solve them, but you've given up on solving them because nothing solves them, and you have no practices or habits around solving them. Fine, let's start from scratch. Let's solve those 1 or 2 problems, and that's sufficient. Turns out that works. It works quite well, actually. And then what happens is you let this positive experience of solving a new problem without attacking the old problem and without impugning their way of doing everything else that they do, kind of bootstraps a flywheel of behavior. We're like, oh, I did these new things, and I solved this new problem in this new way. I'm going to do more of these new things because that was a good experience. And it ends up that the surface of problems that I get to solve for somebody grows over time, but I don't do the growing, they do the growing. And they do the growing because they've had the good experience, and I kind of help them create a good experience without trying to create a bad experience first and then dig out of that hole. I will say, however, this is not necessarily the fastest way to do things, but it is very effective, and it works for what I'm trying to achieve in any case. So, all that summed up to this moment being this morning when I was finishing writing this. I don't believe anymore that what I thought about how change had to work is possible as the majority case. That form of introspect, deconstruct, reconstruct, I think is actually exceptional. I don't think it happens the vast majority of times. I'm not saying it's not good. I'm not saying it's not worthwhile. It is highly valuable to do things that way. But like doing deep refactoring, it is frequently easier to ignore shit and build new shit. And then just start doing the new stuff and ignore the old stuff. And this is a case precisely because it's hard, it's daunting, it's painful. So the base case seems to be rather to render our old identities obsolete. To leave the current version of yourself behind, layered under newer versions. This, of course, has its own problems, but what approach doesn't? So this is almost an outside-in approach. We're saying don't change the person, make a new person. And this is something, talking to Chris, wherever, I don't know where he went, he disappeared. Yesterday morning, we were talking about this, and something he said struck me, which is that people say, oh, that's something that the 2-year-old version of me would have done, or the me from then would have done. Because me from then is distinctly not me from now. That's a different person. I am this person. So the final conclusion for me is that we really are not who we think we are, but we cannot help becoming what we do.